The history of human civilization is filled with stories of both triumph and tragedy. Unfortunately, the darker chapters of our past often involve the exploitation and subjugation of vulnerable individuals, and the history of women slaves in ancient Africa is no exception. While not all men engaged in these reprehensible acts, there were instances of horrific and chilling actions perpetrated against women who were enslaved in various African regions. But what drove men in ancient Africa to commit such disturbing acts against enslaved women? Were there any heroic tales of women who defied the odds and overcame their oppressors? And what do these stories teach us about the importance of understanding and remembering history's darker moments? These are the creepy things men have ever done to women slaves in ancient Africa. Historical accounts attest to the harrowing ordeals that women endured at the hands of their male oppressors, from the heart-wrenching separation from their families to the grueling labor imposed upon them. These women were subjected to the most dehumanizing treatment. Beyond the physical torment, they often faced psychological manipulation and trauma, used as pawns in power struggles and tools for the gratification of their masters' desires. Here are some of the unsettling and creepy things men have been known to do to women slaves in ancient Africa. Women slaves were frequently subjected to grueling labor in harsh conditions. They toiled in fields, mines, and households, enduring long hours of work with minimal rest and poor nourishment. The physical toll on their bodies was immense. One of the most disturbing aspects of slavery was the sexual exploitation of women. Many were subjected to sexual abuse and violence by their enslavers. This included forced marriages, sexual assault, and rape, leading to severe physical and psychological trauma. Women were stripped of their autonomy, forced into their most demeaning and degrading forms of servitude. Their bodies became commodities, traded and violated without remorse. The scars of this systematic degradation linger in the annals of history, serving as a stark reminder of the atrocities committed in the name of power and dominance. Enslaved women were often forcibly separated from their families, with husbands, children, and other loved ones torn away from them. The emotional anguish of losing their kin was a source of immense suffering. The trade of enslaved people in Africa was a deeply unsettling practice. Women and girls were often kidnapped, sold, or traded as commodities, leading to a life of captivity far from their homes. These first four sound very awful, right? You won't believe what's coming up next. But before we tell you the other four, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more interesting videos. Those who attempted to resist or escape the brutal conditions were met with cruel and unusual punishments. Torture, branding, whipping, and other forms of physical abuse were used as a means of control. Enslaved women were dehumanized and treated as property rather than individuals. This dehumanization allowed their oppressors to justify their actions and strip them of their basic rights and dignity. Enslaved women often had their cultures and traditions suppressed, as their captors attempted to erase their identities and assimilate them into the culture of their enslavers. This psychological manipulation added to their suffering. Education and personal growth were severely restricted for enslaved women. Their opportunities for self-improvement were curtailed, further perpetuating their subjugation. Moreover, the cultural and societal structures of the time further perpetuated the subjugation of these women. They were relegated to the margins of society, denied even the most basic rights, and treated as mere possessions rather than individuals deserving of respect and dignity. Their voices were stifled, their stories often relegated to the footnotes of history, buried under the weight of dominant narratives that sought to erase their suffering. You know, back in July, Sierra Leone decided to stop hanging criminals, becoming the 23rd African nation to do so. But guess what? The death penalty is used less often in Africa these days, thanks to the efforts of human rights groups and governments. But some countries still have the death penalty in their laws, and that's because of the strong colonial history it carries. So what kind of punishments did they have in ancient Africa? Let's break it down. Ancient Africans took human life very seriously. They used the death penalty for both planned murders and accidental killings. To make sure it was a big deal, they had some unique punishments. For example, if a father killed his child, they tied the father's body to the child's for 3 days until they started to decompose, and the killer was watched the whole time, which sounds pretty intense. Thieves who broke into graves might end up getting eaten by crocodiles or impaled. But if someone was condemned to death by the people, they could choose to take their own life. If you accidentally killed someone, you had to make things right by making sacrifices, asking for forgiveness from the victim's family, and compensating them fairly. If you covered up a murder or kept information secret, you'd still get in trouble and serve your punishment. And if someone killed a religiously important animal, they might face the death penalty. Back in ancient Africa, they took adultery very seriously. They believed it was a really bad thing, and to stop it from happening, they had the death penalty in place. They were worried that a lot of men were dying because they were attracted to women, and they thought committing adultery would lead to more sins. So, if a married woman committed adultery, her husband could decide how to punish her, maybe forgive her or take her to court. Strangely, they thought this whole problem started with women, so if a woman was caught, she might face death, while a man would get a much lighter punishment, like 1,000 lashes. Stealing private stuff was not taken lightly in ancient Africa. If someone got caught stealing, they had to pay back 3 times the value of what they took. But if they stole public property, the punishment was much worse. They could be fined 180 times the value. To make things even more uncomfortable, after they confessed, they might be publicly beaten 100 times by hand, swear an oath, or even get thrown into a river full of crocodiles. Bribery was a big no-no in ancient Africa. If someone was caught taking a bribe from the government, they could lose their job, and their status would drop down to that of a farmer. The government clerks would sometimes hide files that showed someone had been convicted because bribery was so common. During the time of Ramses IX, many criminals, including grave robbers, got away with their crimes by paying bribes. Back in ancient Africa, there was no worse crime than going against the king. It was basically treason. And they were very, very serious about it. Whether you were rich or poor, if you were caught going against the king, the punishment was always death. They didn't mess around with this one. There's a famous story about a middle-class wife of King Ramses III, known as T. She got jealous because the king picked an heir who wasn't her son, Nadawar. So she made a plan to have the king killed, but they caught her and all the people involved and gave them some really harsh punishments. And here's the creepy part. Those who went against the king weren't even buried when they died. They were just tossed into the river. Stealing from graves in ancient Egypt was a big no-no, especially if the person in the grave was from the royal family. Technically, it was a state crime, and the punishment was death. But sometimes, instead of executing the offenders, they'd cut off their hands or give them 100 lashes. However, there were special laws to protect mummies from being disturbed. Despite the grim realities, tales of resilience and defiance also emerged from the shadows. Some women found ways to resist, subtly challenging the oppressive systems that sought to break their spirits. Their acts of quiet rebellion serve as testaments to the enduring strength of the human spirit, offering a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness that enveloped their lives. These punishments were definitely different from what we have today, and they made us appreciate the changes in our legal systems. Now, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on these ancient African punishments? Do you think they were too harsh, or in some cases, not harsh enough? Have you heard of any similar punishments in other parts of the world? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more captivating explorations of history and beyond.